Well, hello, welcome back to Drucker TV. It's been quite a morning already, and we've got lots more for you through the rest of today and tomorrow. I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Robin Dunbar, Professor of Evolutionary Psychology at Oxford University, but we were just discussing that he's also sometimes passed as an anthropologist or a biologist, zoologist. You've been studying your field under a range of headings, but it's the same work, essentially. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Absolutely so, yes.
Yeah.
And partly because all those different fields, of course, have different disciplinary traditions and methods, and I tend to combine all three at the same time, which is unusual, I guess.
And perhaps lies behind the success, not least of this latest book, Social Brain, which is sitting there before me, which you've produced with co-authors. And the words are in balance, aren't they? There's emphasis on both those words. It's the brain, it's how we respond, but it's also very much the context of groups, teams, society.
Yes, and I suppose the message is actually our brains evolved throughout our sort of primate heritage into humans, and we just do what primates do on a grander and more impressive scale, if you like. But the whole of that was driven by the need to manage very large, very complex social communities. And that is a very taxing and difficult computational problem. So we need a big computer to handle it.
Sometimes you hear a statistic quoted that the DNA of Homo sapiens and a chimpanzee is 98% the same. Is that actually a useful, meaningful thing to say, or does it not really tell us anything?
It sounds very exciting,
Yes.
but it probably doesn't tell us very much,
No.
really, because a lot of that stuff, remember, is just what's called junk DNA. It doesn't do anything interesting at all. Sometimes it literally doesn't do anything interesting.
Yes.
It's parasitical and has come in as viruses or bacteria that have embedded themselves into our DNA, ironically, but being neutral in their effects. So,
Yes.
there are, in terms of the sort of distinctions genetically between humans and great apes, to be fair,
Yes.
they are not that big, but the ones that exist very often are crucial. So it has to do with how big the brain grows. Now that only takes probably one or two genes, because it's a question of when you switch the brain growth, the neuron growth program on, and when you switch it off, that's what produces a big brain. And of course what you do with your big brain then is you go about the world learning stuff.
And that's the evolutionary point. This is why, without being too anthropocentric about it, if that's the right word, this is why humans have dominated, because we have developed this thing that has really enabled everything we see around us.
Yes, I mean, it's our ability to cooperate in very large groups,
Right.
which has been the secret of our success. Just as that, the ability to cooperate in groups has been the secret of monkeys and apes' evolutionary success as species.
Yes.
They are one of the most successful groups in the vertebrate world, or the mammal world, certainly.
Yes.
They were in existence when the dinosaurs were about. They survived the dinosaurs and, haven't really changed, whereas most of the other species have changed dramatically. But it's this ability to handle large groups. And of course, having a big brain, it is like having a big computer. You invent a computer to do a job, which originally, of course, was just counting numbers, right? It's a computational thing.
Yes, yes.
But then it turns out you can use the same algorithms to do all sorts of interesting stuff, word processing, AI.
Yes, we're hearing a bit about yes.
Putting cars together, painting cars in factories, all this, the many, many, many different uses to which you can apply the same machinery.
Yes.
And so one of those is the capacity to create culture and in turn to do all sorts of other, you might say, less useful things at the time, but proved to be very useful. Science, right?
Now, you've clearly worked in some large organisations, like some of the UK's great universities, and you've seen other people in businesses and organisations, and probably heard stories of behaviour that strike you perhaps as a little odd, given what you know about the social brain and the evolution of human beings. What explains this mismatch, do you think, between how we behave with each other sometimes in the professional, commercial setting, and what actually scientists know about how humans can function together optimally?
I think it's just a demographic issue, the size of the organization, right? So if you look at our history, most of our evolutionary history as a species, our existence as a species, has been in very, very small village-sized communities. 8,000 years ago, we actually learned how to live in villages. That's very, very recent. And once we learned how to live in villages, of course, village sizes exploded. We got towns, cities, nation states as we have them now. But the problem is our mindset and a lot of our behaviors, as it were, and our psychological adaptations are adapted to small-scale communities. So what we've had to find in the course of that history, those last 8,000 years, is ways to overcome the dysfunctionality of very, very big groups. Because what happens is things don't work properly in big groups. So, but we've been quite good at finding solutions, sticking plaster solutions that allow us to get over that. Group size increased a bit further. And I think the problem really of the last 50 years, probably more than anything else, is just the sheer size of the organizations we're trying to deal with. And, we're not really designed to do that. And what's happened then, in desperate attempt to try and make these big organizations efficient, you've had a sort of accountant's mentality, if you like, where, we must design the inputs and outputs for the spreadsheets in terms of what we can measure, which is, of course, profits and losses. And in the process of that, what seems to have got lost is the sense that you're dealing with humans. And humans who are very social. That an organization is a village. It's a social organization. If it doesn't, if the villagers aren't talking to each other, the thing doesn't work. And so, we've kind of lost sight of that sense of the village being a human, the organization being a human village and needing to work as a human organization rather than as a sort of strict hierarchical, sort of you must salute the big chief and all this kind of thing, as though it's a military organization, which is fine. The military need that. They have rather, shall we say, difficult circumstances to deal with when you have to have complete discipline. In this sort of civilian world, of course, you don't need to go to those. But there is a sense in which the sort of hierarchical structure of management systems that we've evolved has come out of that military view, as it were, because presumably it's worked very well for the military most of the time.
Although, of course, if you go to Sandhurst, they'll tell you that their view of leadership is sometimes rather more progressive and interesting than people outside the military believe it to be.
To be fair to them, I think they genuinely are. Have moved on. I mean, they've brought a lot of this stuff in. But you can see, if you look back over European history for the last 300 years, since the 30 Years' War in the 1650s, you can see the military planners playing with different company sizes and different platoon sizes to try and get these numbers right so that they work on the battlefield. And gradually sort of converging on the structure of modern armies as we have them now, which are very, very specific. All modern armies have the same structure with the same numbers.
Now, with your co-authors, you point us in the direction of certain types of behaviour, certain ways of looking at the group, at the team at work, and how we can draw on some of this learning in a practical and useful way.
Yes, I mean, this book is really directed at business organisation, but I suppose any kind of organisation, whether it's a government department or a hospital or what have you, where you're trying to coordinate very large numbers of humans to produce some product of some kind, as it were. And our argument is we've clearly got very worried about the level of loneliness that's kicked up in the last 2 or 3 decades, the impact that has on depression, time people are taking off work, the pressure that's putting on everybody who's left behind at work, picking up the work they have to do, and so on. And so we're trying to find sort of solutions to that, but the solutions really are focusing on physical health and mental health, and what we've completely overlooked is the key to the whole thing, as we argue in the book. That's the social component, the social health of it. And that you need to look at the organizational structures to create this sense of belonging, that you're part of a family, part of a village, engaged in a common task, you have a common objective, a plan into the future, you're there for a purpose.
Well, this is an interesting echo of what we heard this morning from
Absolutely,
Giampiero,
yes.
talking about a family and a home.
I wasn't quite sure who'd written our book, Giampiero or us.
Well, that's encouraging. A conference where people are agreeing.
Yes.
That's very useful. Now we
Can't be economists, that's the difference.
Oh, well, that's 5 opinions, 4 economists. I can't finish this interview, we've got a couple of minutes left, without raising what many people will have heard your name in association with, but you've hinted at it already, and this thing called the Dunbar number. Now, perhaps you can actually tell you what you think this is rather than what other people tell you what they think it is.
Formally, the Dunbar number is the limit on the number of people with whom you can have meaningful reciprocated relationships at any one time. It's a very dynamic thing. People drop out and new people get added in, or new people get added in, so you drop other people out. But that number is very resolutely stuck at 150. That's the extent of our personal social networks as we measure it. It turns up all over the place in organizational structures.
Yes.
It is actually only that is the Dunbar number, as it were. But
yes.
Strictly speaking, it's the Dunbar numbers with an S, a plural, because in fact it's a fractally structured series of layers.
I see.
Rather like the ripples on a pond. If you throw a stone into a calm alpine lake and look at the ripples going out from over it, this actually mirrors very nicely the structure of your social network, as it were, but also a lot of organizational structures, including the structures of modern armies. So you have these layers at these very specific numbers, 5, 15, 50, 150, and then going beyond that,
I see.
500.
Well, I was going to say, because in the world of social media networks, people sometimes say they have 500 or 1,000 friends.
Yes.
They use the word friend.
Yes. No, I mean, so do we, actually. We call them all friends. Half of them, because despite the fact half of them are actually family.
Yes,
right?
Not necessarily the same thing.
But yes, but you kind of give priority to family.
Yes.
Is the interesting thing. But there is a distinct difference between people within the 150 circle and beyond the 150 circle. Within the 150 circle, these are relationships that have history. You invest a lot of time in maintaining them through time. They are relationships full of trust and obligation and reciprocation.
Yes.
Outside the 150, things become much more transactional. So
I
that's
see.
the area that economists have always spent their time worrying about.
Yes.
My pitch is always, well, actually, most of our trades, except if you go to your corner shop, maybe. Well, maybe not, because you know everybody in your corner shop.
Yeah.
But if you go to some out of town warehouse shop, yes, you're dealing with strangers, but most of your negotiations in everyday life are with people, in fact, within your 150 circle, and that changes the nature of the economic equation dramatically. Because you're more willing to give them something and not expect a return, or to agree to reciprocate something without having to actually say so, because they just know you will do it.
Well, thank you, Robin. Thank you for bringing us back to the social in the business world that we need to remember. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Great pleasure.